there's no rationale other than perhaps lack of political will to explain where we are today. So our libraries are running for two reasons. One is a very political reason, and the other is to provide certain services. So my own background is not as a librarian at all. I'm a community organizer by trade from way back. And after a long spell away from organizing, maybe because I was also a writer for a little bit in between, I started to see that organizing is an important skill that I could bring to this question of why we don't have readers in India for the books we publish. In some languages we do quite well, in many more we don't, and one of our regional languages is English, and we do very, very poorly, like just dramatically at the bottom of the heap kind of poorly in English. So in our two libraries, your question about who comes and the reading patterns, the first library has been up and running for 3 years. We've signed up 1,800 members. We seem to have about a 50% active membership rate, because at the second library where we've signed up about 600-700 people, around 350 people are active. At the first one, around 900 people are active. There is an endless need, so we could easily have signed up 10,000 more people, but we don't have the space or the resources. There seems to be some sort of algorithm to explain why the 900 and why the 1,800. Now, I think from watching it play out, a lot has to do with the physical space. There's a point after which it becomes uncomfortable to board a bus, and you let it go by and you wait for the next one. If you're waiting for a library, it's not coming around anytime soon. The very motivated often come into our library, but the vast majority of them are people who have never seen books as a refuge. They've never seen books as a philosophical undertaking, as an idea, as a place to get lost or a place to save themselves. And they're all little children, 9, 10, 8, 7, most of them frightened by books. So when we introduce books to children, we do it in such a way that we get past the fear. And most of the borrowing is around picture books, and most of it is in Hindi. Now the thing about reading is it's a lot like riding a bicycle. The only way you can actually do it is by doing it. So there's this whole theoretical exercise where you're taught to decode, and someone says A is for and I is for an R, and then you have to actually read a lot to really become a reader. And that's where you go from being a reader to being a fluent reader. And finally, there's reading for thinking, and then after that, there's metacognition, and you're aware of your thoughts, and you can produce them, make a product, maybe a thesis. So the kids in our library, we were expecting them to know how to read. It took us a good 2 years to really allow ourselves to understand that they don't read fluently enough to enjoy reading, because they haven't had access to books. I mean, you can't be told how to ride a bicycle by someone drawing a picture on a blackboard. You have to own one, you have to be able, or at least have access to one, borrow your neighbor's, sit on it and ride on it quite a bit and fall off of it quite a bit. So we are into making books available and putting them in people's hands so that they can become fluent enough. It's only when you're fluent enough as a reader that you start reading between the words and start thinking and start hearing your voice thinking, whether it's because you're surprised at the outcome of the story or confused by what happened in the middle of it. That's your own interrogation of the text. That piece of it depends on fluency. So we are just now looking at what do we need to do as a library. Basic literacy was something we were never in a position to tackle, because our model is to invite citizen volunteers to come in, hopefully to convert some of them into citizen activists, and of course, to invite the members into that kind of activism, because ultimately it's their library and the issue is theirs. So in the midst of all this, we're also now looking at the fact that we're going to have to do something about fluency. We're still not exactly looking at doing something with literacy, because right from the outset, we knew the reason adults don't come to the library, though we have a good collection aimed at them in Hindi, they don't come to the library because they're not literate. And again, we're not in a position to do anything about it. It'll take a whole Kerala style, each one teach one, huge movement for Delhi to tackle that question.
Other reasons have a focus more on getting libraries into learning centers and bringing people together. It's more of a meeting space, and it's not a space where you necessarily just be quiet all the time. That's why the sh is also not really so relevant for us, but still it's also important that there are areas in the library where you can read and where it is silent. So we really try to zone the library, so there are special zones where you can be lively, where there can be discussions, and then on the other hand there are zones where it has to be quiet, and what is important that you really communicate this also, because like people wouldn't know just right away. They can be silent, they can be can talk.
Now I would like to add to your statement that both of you are not coming from the library background, but still I think that especially Mridula, you are in true sense a librarian because you are living this spirit. Being a library professional myself, I know our libraries, how the staff is working. I have worked in several libraries and also seen the libraries and how demotivated they are to provide information services. This also I have noticed. So for me it's really nice to see that Mridula always focuses on thinking. So she is doing all these projects so that students can read and also think. Developed in Bangalore, it's called Guri. And there the library had said that they come across some unspoken things, like there's a demand from community to talk about these in these spaces, like sexual politics and gender biasing. Have you come across these kind of things?
Yes. Hello. Yes. I think when we say that a library is a space where people should be able to talk and think out loud, it's because the library is itself, like books, a tool for thinking, and we do our best thinking as social beings, as people who exchange ideas. Gender definitely comes up among the ideas that people are thinking about, especially growing people, people whose ideas are in formation. Gender is one of the big ones. So there's lots to observe as a librarian in the library, and I've certainly seen it in front of me. You know, a lot of the, yesterday one of our student council members, this is in the democratic kind of structures we've built into the library so that we are definitely preparing people to own and operate their own libraries. We have this structure called the student council or the Bal Panchayat, which is where the young people in the library can step forward and learn and get skilled up. And one of the skills we actually hope to teach is not just alphabetizing, but also organizing. So one of our student council members put a picture of himself on Facebook. His profile picture is the one, you know, with the garland of flowers, that one. I've only ever seen girls do that. And immediately the first comment was from another member of the student council who said, "Ladki lag rahi hai." So you look like a girl. And the conversation, "Ladki lag rahi hai," was also happening at the library this morning as a result. We know that this is an ongoing thing in our library, like it is everywhere, but it is particularly crucially important to address it in the library because the library has a responsibility as a place for ideas and for ideas being exchanged to facilitate that exchange. So from the very first year, unlike the literacy question where we were a little slow catching up, we were immediately anxious about our responsibility on this question, and we partnered up with other organizations that specialize in facilitating these conversations and invited them into the library. And so we've had these facilitated conversations and learning and workshops, which also resulted in the Hindi section of the library and in the English section of the library, we have specially curated collections of books aimed at teenagers. And books like What is a Boy, What is a Girl, in Hindi actually, Ladka Kyon, Ladki Kyon, Ladka Kya Hai, Ladki, something like that. And a bunch of basic, like United Nations work booklets on how to get through your teen years, some biology type texts on Mera Sharir, mixed up with like Anne Frank's diary. And like good fiction that gets at those questions, good non-fiction that gets at those questions.
Because I know that a lot of rural libraries, they are dependent on donations, and they use social media as their channel and ask people for help.
Yeah, mainly the target group of our libraries are people learning German, because like most of the books we have there are in German. So there's a lot of things you can do in social media, but I would like point out one example what we did in Mexico. So we had a project for German learners who already knew a little bit of German, and they were invited on social media to write together with a German author a book. Well, the basic story was already planned by this author, but then on social media they were encouraged to also contribute text, also form decisions. So they were writing together this story on Facebook for 90 days. Each day there was a new posting with either a question or even a question, how should the story evolve? And then at the end of the 90 days we had created one big story, which was then later published as a book with also learning materials, because that's also what they need. And this was a really nice way to engage them, to also use crowdsourcing and to activate them. So this would be one example what you can do.
We are avid and heavy users of social media. In fact, our social media coordinator is sitting in the audience right now. Hi, Purnima. We use social media for the two purposes of the library: to speak internally amongst ourselves, to gain an understanding of who we are, and that's the membership of the library. So the boy with the profile picture is talking via social media to the other people in the library, and they're talking back to him. That's happening in the library. In that process, we've, as outsiders to the community, who are doing our best to integrate into the community without losing sight of the fact that we'll always be outsiders, we've come into lots of interesting and challenging moments. For example, we thought, well, we should have posts in Hindi, and that was after we realized our members are reading these posts. After we watched some of the kids who were too young to have Facebook accounts, still too young to have Facebook accounts, but now they have them. So after that happened and the tagging and things started happening, we then did these Hindi posts. All our posts, or the majority of our internal posts where a child is getting congratulated for having read 100 books and getting a bag full of books to own. That child is on media, and it's really for his audience, his or her local community to see this. And we were doing this in Devanagari. And then we woke up one day, and our social media coordinator woke up one day and said, they don't read Devanagari, they read transliterated English, Devanagari, Hindi. So now we do a lot more English plus transliteration plus. Of course, the end of the line on that, and we're trying to work toward that, is our blog, our Instagram account, our website, our Facebook, our Twitter feed, that we should increasingly be populating it with and giving controls, like the skills plus participation. I mean, these democratic structures I was referencing earlier are very important, not just in our library. I was reading about these Bonneau libraries in Paris, where one of the first places that was burnt down in one of these neighborhoods populated by new immigrants, the people who had been pushed to the edges of the city. One of the first places burnt down was the library, and the librarians' grief was in their thinking, but this was theirs, then why did they burn it down? And this, I think about this a lot. If this is theirs, how will that look? It will not look like something people burn down, but then how will that look? So social media is a place where we ask that question. The other reason for social media is to ask for donations, is to invite volunteers, is to press home the question of why we don't have libraries in Delhi. That's a second track on which we run. And I think there's going to be plenty of leadership over time from within the community on that track. In the end, I think we will have libraries in India, not because some people in India decide to gift it to the vast majority of India. It's if we can get the vast majority of Indians to ask for it. So when the Aam Aadmi Party puts out a platform prior to the election saying we're going to have so many hundred libraries, which they did in their last agenda, and then they went on to define it as reading rooms in which people will study. You know? We're going to need to do something about that, and the we will have to be a very big we.
And as librarians or information providers, how far or how can you can make people understand these digital library things?
Yeah, it's certainly a question of communicating also and making it accessible. We as the Goethe Institute, we do have our e-library, and there you can get a lot of media, but so far it was pretty complicated to get your account and then to install it on your device. Like on every device it was a little bit different, so you had to really communicate really good how it worked. Now we're also trying to improve that. There was one step made only recently that it's becoming easier, but I think this is crucial, and I think this is what like the big companies are doing really good. That's why probably in Amazon we can never compete with an Amazon. So there's always this danger that they dictate what is going to be read. But still, for us, it is important to explore a lot of things. It's not only about books, it's also about other media which we want to make accessible in our libraries, which we already offer now, but who is actually issuing a CD right now? We do have them still, but the computers don't even have a CD driver. So we're also trying to establish new ways. I mean, Spotify is not available here in India, but there will be other technology. Same with films. There's like few projects right now at the Goethe Institute worldwide basis to experiment on that, but still it's also a question of the accessibility.
We are using all this space right now in the library here. We are using this cloud-based software, and the whole data is on the cloud. And these clouds are handled by big companies, and so our all the data and everything is going to be stored there. So it's interesting to see how future will unfold when all our data, all our secrets are, these big companies are holding in their hands.
I would like to add something to this because, we're using a cloud in our library, but we use it on a German server, and the Goethe Institute is particularly really aware of, making data secure. Like in Europe, we have a new law which actually protects the data really, really strong. I don't know how is it here in India, but like this is a matter which we are really concerned about at the Goethe Institute. Because like people are not aware that everything what they do digitally, it will leave traces, and that's why we also have a lot of initiatives to actually teach people how to work with their data and what they would give online, what information they would give online. So we also had on our website a huge feature on data security, and that's really important to us.
Okay. My next question is to both of you, though you are not from library science field, but still, what is the future of libraries? What do you think? Since everything is available online now, if you need something, you can simply Google it. So, what do you think? How far we will need the libraries in future?
So you mean the physical space of the library? And you and I were talking earlier about, for both of us, our library physical spaces really matter. The bulk of our membership live in very, very small spaces that serve multiple functions. And the idea of adding on one more function, a place of quiet to read, or a place where we can have a discussion about a book, that's just not feasible, especially if there's, some people who want to do it, some don't. In many cases, it's the parents who don't. Kids come to our library, they join, it takes them a while, they realize that they are interested in this big project and that it's a lifelong project. The space becomes very, very important for them to do the traditional work that library spaces have always done, which is a space where you can come and sit and read. The other way in which it happens that our space is really important is, I think, also true for libraries in other parts of the world. It's a community space. I think there's just like such, what is it, like a syncretic kind of thing there, because you are a thinker, but you're also a social being, and those are not two separate things. It's really a very related thing. So when you come into the library, all over the world, I think you're coming into a place where you're hoping someone else is going to pick the book you picked. Like, maybe you'll fall in love with them, So there's all this stuff that's very, very social around books and reading. And that will always require, whether you're doing it through an app or doing it digitally in some other way, whether you do it at home and then come to the library for a discussion group, a book club. We have a book club at our library. The most important thing we do in the library to get people reading is little kids need to have books read to them, especially if the book is not going to be read for a test or as an act of decoding, just making the sounds the letters make, but as an act of thinking, and this act is incredibly unfamiliar to the kid, then it needs to be demonstrated. Like the book has to be opened, and perhaps at least 100 times the child has to be able to sit in a circle with 5 or 6 other kids, maybe even sing a song at the outset about friendship, then listen to the person who's doing the reading. Me or one of our other volunteers or activists will open the book and read, and they'll be alarmed when they feel alarmed, and they'll be excited when they're excited as they read, and this will become more than an act of decoding. So the social space matters because this needs to be demonstrated, so that has to happen with human beings in a space. It matters because reading in the first generation experience is a lonely experience. It's possibly lonely for all of us at different times for different reasons, but for this group of people, reading poorly, doing something your parents didn't do, doing something your grandparents didn't do, doing something you were explicitly forbidden from doing because your caste is not supposed to read. The historic weight of that is very lonely. Libraries are a space where we break that solitude and that loneliness down, and also build the solitude. So it's a really interesting and kind of an amazing project. The space absolutely matters.
Yeah, I'm not only talking for our libraries, but for the Goethe Institute as an institution, because we are focusing on digital, but we know that our physical network is so important. That's why new institutions are even created right now in regions where we see there the diplomatic relations are really important. And for us, the intercultural exchange is really important. We can have that digital, but we need also the encounter in a space. And what is a really nice development is that, like in India in 2006, a lot of Goethe Institute libraries were closed. And then 3 years later, they were reopened again. And now we have even see that our libraries grow. Just recently we opened up a new library in Kolkata with much more space than we had before. And that's also a shift in how we work, and we're trying to have bigger libraries to provide more space, to have different regions, to have this community space you were referring to. But I also think that the future of libraries will be really diverse, and we will not only offer books, but all sorts of media and all sorts of workshops. We are now working at the Goethe Institute with maker spaces, where we have all sorts of workshops. It can be also a fashion workshop, or it can be a coding workshop. And then again, we try to experiment with a lot of things. We as the library for the Goethe Institute also want to be the thinkers, what could be the next big thing.
You had that interesting point about a generation of readers who now read Hindi in Roman English as opposed to in Devanagari, and that's the experience I have as well of the generation. And you can see this by reading a Hindi newspaper, which actually now increasingly is transliterated from the English edition that's supposed to be written now. But one of the things that we struggle with as teachers is to sort of recognize in some way the pressure an urban generation faces vis-a-vis English, particularly when you have a very, very clear political economy of returns on investing in one or the other language. And what a lot of Hindi-speaking learners also feel is this pressure not to be bilingual, but to sort of, no matter, the Hindi becomes intimate and familiar. You talk about food and love, and you talk to your grandmother, but the emphasis on learning in English. So I'm wondering if you've sensed some of this in the library, either a pressure from parents that, okay, if they're going to go, let them read an English book, or the sense of, and then that mix of, this mix of kind of alienation but desire, and you know, that sense of struggle in that way. So how does that question of mixing those fit in, especially on the Hindi-English spectrum?
So I think all of the pressures in outside the library do come inside the library too. We are a mirror to that, but a library can be a better place than the city in which it's in. And because people can come there with higher ideals, with ideas for what they would like to see change. So that also operates inside the library. So English gets primacy at times in the library. I will honestly tell you that when we do the community organizing work of walking on the streets and talking about the library, we take English books with us alongside the Hindi books, but really we take English books with us. Because parents feel good about knowing their children are having access to these riches. I think in terms of how the library can be a better place, if more people are reading more all the time, and that's what the library is trying to do, I do think these questions will come up within and amongst themselves as questions of who do they want to be. And the more they are able to think, see, books are an app, books are technology. They are technology that has been with us for hundreds and thousands of years, carrying these narratives about who we are. The more access we have to this kind of technology, this tool for thinking, the more powerful we are as thinkers. In our library, there is a possibility that people thinking together powerfully will look to destabilize these kinds of binaries, these kinds of pressures people feel to disown themselves. And I can't predict what will happen. I have my hopes for what will happen, but I do think that people thinking together has always been very powerful. And social movements have come out of this. So anything might happen, is my answer. We're aware of it, and we're not always clear or sure of how we're dealing with it. We're kind of mucking it through as we go.
One is, what are the institutional challenges to the community library model? When you turn a project like libraries over to the state, you are going to, in some way, publicize that space, right? Their vision for what society is going to be is going to enter that space, and they're going to provide, to do services in the way that they deem appropriate. So how do we negotiate with the state to kind of scale the community library project on a much, city level or country level scale? The second question is, how, as a kind of day-to-day administrator, organizer, kind of visionary of the library project, do you balance this, like Goethe said, right? How do you balance this kind of desire to view a library as a place where you get services, and also as a place where you can go discover yourself? How does one balance the view of the library, and how do you provide the services required?
I think the answer is, if we build democratic structures into these libraries, the community library model that we are figuring out as we do it is trying to incorporate as much democratic participation from the members as possible. I think the more we do that, the more we will be seeing a lot of answers to one question, like many voices, many different answers. Yes, when you ask members what they want, they will tell you they want to know how to get a job. Where's the section in the library about career advancement? Can I have a time management book? How to get rich quick book? palmistry, yoga, quick spirituality. It's just, so yeah, I mean, is this higher thinking? Are there other people out there in the library who are doing higher thinking? I think all of those things are happening. It is not the place of, it is not my place in the library to then decide that we're going to not do this or do that. People are asking for sample test papers. What Aam Aadmi Party wants to provide is what people are coming to our library and asking us for. While we tell ourselves we're here to fulfill this mandate of providing what is not available, we're able to continue to say no to some things that people are asking for, because that's available at that other library over there. Yes, you need to find the money to pay for that. At this free library, you'll read this graphic novel about the emergency. This is what we have. Your first question, can you repeat a little bit of that?
So I guess essentially thinking about like Aam Aadmi finally taking a kind of like a role in the library movement, which is a welcome step, of course, because it's new. But then again, they're kind of twisting it to their own purposes, right? They are
right. The state. If you hand this over to the state, what happens to it? Well, I think in Paris, I don't know a lot about it, a little bit that I read, because it just really sat with me for a long time. I've tried to work in community building organizations before also, and there is always this anxiety about when we start talking about public funding for something. We are so far from even that conversation right now. I haven't really had to think about it except in this kind of late night by yourself going to bed space. What happens 10 years from now, what will we ask for when we get the platform from which to ask for it? I think we would always want citizen participation in the public library system that we are asking for. In Kerala, the model was 100 years of small community libraries started by handfuls of citizens. Somebody would die, somebody well off, and leave a legacy of like 1,000 books in their house, unheard of riches. It would belong to that local area. 2-3 people would have to administer it. It would be turned into a library. Of course, a certain caste would be welcome to come in and read, and maybe not others, right? So this went on for about 100 years, and then the state did take over. After a series of mass mobilizations through these sort of conferences that were called, and that took a few decades. The Kerala state government now runs the community, the former community libraries have been incorporated, and new libraries have been built under the state mandate. In many places, from what I understand, libraries are not as functional as they used to be. So Kerala is both a wonderful model and an argument against the idea that we're a poor country, we can't afford this. But at the same time, it also gives us a little bit of something to be anxious about. If we decide, the state runs this, will there be lethargy? We know that the Delhi Public Library system right now requires you to put a deposit to use the library, or get the Supreme Court judge to write a letter introducing you. One way or the other, you're stuck. If you're 4 years old and live in Sheikh Sarai Phase 1. We don't ask for anything. If you left hand your mother's signature, we'll let you in. So what happens when the state takes over is a long ways in the future. I'm not saying we don't need to think about it right now, but certainly we can start to understand what's happened all over the world. Probably a library will not be burnt down, even if it is run by the state, if the local people genuinely think it's theirs. So the librarian who feels the grief, but it was theirs, has to contend with the fact that it must not have been theirs.
It is a community-run project, isn't it? Is there a training system in place for the people who volunteer? If so, are they then taught how, when they're teaching kids reading, are they being taught how to read what kind of book? Which is again an evolutionary question you ask once the child is literate enough to read basic books. But is there a system in place that the volunteers are trained? 2, are the volunteers encouraged themselves to be voracious readers? Because then it will go stagnant very easily if the volunteers aren't reading themselves. Is there a question you ask in your internal administrative space?
Yes, there is a training to come. I mean, sometimes people come to us and say they would like to come and distribute sweets or read to the children, and we say no. Most of us who have children know that we would not want to send our children to a place where random people can walk in and cuddle children. So no, and we have a code of conduct that people sign on to, and it took a lot of work to come up with it. So it's just even to enter as a volunteer, you go through a process. There's an orientation. There's you provide your ID and so on. The things we don't ask from members, we ask from the outsiders who are coming into a kind of membership in the community. And then there's training for doing the read aloud. So, we are reading picture books to children. If you read picture books ever in your life, I didn't grow up reading them because they were not widely available when I was a child. But I had children and then I read to the kids. Picture books, I mean, they're like the most beautiful things. There's like death and life and loss and love and friendship. I read a picture book the other day in which these two turtles find a hat. And they're like, oh, it's a good looking hat. Yeah, it's a pretty good looking hat. I would look good in it, Then they both go away from the hat because there's one hat and there's two turtles. And they try to fall asleep. But the one, his one eye is always open and he's looking at the hat and he says, are you asleep yet? And Lily, are you asleep yet? Yes, I'm really, what are you thinking about? What are you dreaming? And the other one who's supposedly asleep says, I'm dreaming about the hat. And you're wearing it and you look so good in it. So I read this story and we have like marvelous, marvelous conversation about it. So there's an art to that, picking the right book, understanding how to read the book. If you're not a reader yourself, you probably don't know how to think while reading, so you wouldn't be able to convey how that book felt to you in your, read aloud. So most of the people who volunteer in the library are readers. Sometimes we have members from the middle class in India who come in and they haven't read maybe a whole lot, but they do seem, I think, to start reading in the library. Sometimes we have members of the community who come on and do the read alouds, and these are our best read alouders because it's usually a library member who joined when she was 12 and she went to the first 100 read alouds. Then she did, that's so boring, and then she read 1,000 books more on her own, okay, at least 400, and then she started reading aloud. And she's an amazing read aloud person. We have a number of these kids who read aloud to other kids, and they also go to a formal training because it's good to consciously know what is it that you're doing when you do this thing. So there's a lot of training.
Like 3 years old, if I'm not wrong. So, what do you think that, what is the highlight of this 3 years has been, what do you do as an outcome? I mean, in 3 years, what?
There are just so many good moments, it's hard to tell you. Like a really good read aloud is a good highlight. We have something called the honor roll of readers. So what we're actually doing that I didn't talk much about is we're figuring out, we're running this as a learning lab, which is not the same thing as experimenting on people. We're experimenting on ourselves. We're trying to figure out what are the best practices and the most important programs to put in place in a library so that first generation readers don't feel unwelcome, acquire skills, read to think, become aware of themselves as thinkers, start using thinking as a way to produce products that speak to them. So one of the best practices is we celebrate reading milestones. So I forgot to ask you guys if you're parents. I keep talking about how I'm a parent. It's absolutely necessary to celebrate our children when they do things that are amazing. Why ignore it? So when kids read 10 books, their name goes up on the wall. It's called the Honor Roll of Readers, and you get your first star next to your name. You get to go to the Honor Roll box and pick a book of your own to keep forever, to lend out, to put your name in, and you get a packet of something sweet. After that, you don't get a packet of something sweet again, but at 40 books again, at 80 books again, then you write 20 book reports to enter the 100 book club. We have 996 children on this wall right now, and we decorated the 100th spot in red glitter and put balloons. And for 3 days, everybody's been standing there waiting for the 1,000th kid to walk in. And she didn't walk in yesterday or today. We're open again tomorrow.
One month. What is the age group?
Age 4 a month. All ages.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I would like to wrap up this session here. Thank you so much, Mridula and Thomas, for giving your opinions about libraries. There could be a lot of topics to cover: public libraries in India, rural libraries, community center, information centers, but then we have time shortage always. And then let's hope for next year with City Scripts, one more session, and then we see each other again next year. Thank you.